Okay, here is the next PowerPoint presentation on culture. We just finished up with this slide to give you an idea that we're right on track here. Now, culture has two components we'll start with. Material culture. These are the material objects that distinguish a group of people. The home that you live in, the cell phone that you have in your hand, your laptop, your clothes, your homes, any artwork, pictures, photos that you may have in your room or in your car. Anything that you can physically touch represent the material objects of culture. Every culture places different importance on different objects. We tend to place a lot of emphasis on material things within our culture and specific material items. Again, like I can think of probably cell phones would be a good one. Certain brands of clothing tend to be very important with high school and college age students. If you travel to different parts of the world, there's very little, if any, emphasis placed on brand name clothing or even cell phones. Now, the non-material culture refers to a group's way of thinking. So these are the things that you can't touch with your hands. The non-tangible parts of culture, like beliefs, values, language, ideology, symbols, rituals. And we'll talk about what all these mean. And again, every culture has sort of a little bit of a different set of beliefs, values, languages, ideologies, etc. Symbols are anything that carry a specific meaning for people who share a culture. If I wave my hand at you like this, hey, hello, you know what that means. I don't know if you could really see that or not, but you kind of get the idea. If I would stick my middle finger up, which I'm not going to do on this camera, you would immediately know what that means. That gesture carries a specific meaning. That symbolizes something very specific within our culture. I always thought this was kind of funny. I'm older than you guys, obviously, so I'm not hip with a lot of the textees, you know, the abbreviations. My daughter is your age, and she texts a lot, and I can't understand half of what she says. I've got some of it down, though. I know IDK. I don't know. I think that's kind of funny. This is the periodic table of texting, by the way, if you've ever seen this. I've got BFF down, best friend forever. I know what that means. Some of these I've seen. A lot of them I haven't. But these represent symbols. These are specific symbols, these letters, that when put together in a certain way represent ideas or words. Language is simply a set of symbols that allow people to talk to one another or to communicate with one another. There's not just one language, obviously. There are many, many languages that exist in the world. And maybe you can stop for a second. Take a guess. How many languages do you think there are? 1, 10, 100, 10,000, a million? Well, there are roughly 7,000 languages in the world. Now, a lot of these languages are not spoken frequently, but a lot of them are still used frequently, depending on where in the world you are. 6,809 languages. When we talk about culture, we also often talk about images, and I always like to show this image initially when we're talking about culture. And the question I always ask is, what is the first thing you think of when you see this image? Middle Eastern women in burqas. Unfortunately, a lot of images conjure up stereotypical ideas or feelings of fear, and the response that I get, and maybe you're thinking it, or maybe you just said it out loud at your laptop or your phone, the first thing that I normally hear is terrorist. They look like terrorists. Well, is that really fair to say? No. I mean, if you went to the Middle East, a lot of women, especially in this part of the Middle East, a lot of the women are dressed like this, and the vast majority of them are certainly not terrorists. Now, again, you guys are mature college students. I'm going to make an argument. I'm going to submit to you that we definitely think ethnocentrically. In other words, we generally tend to judge other cultures by our own standards, and sometimes symbols mean different things to different people. Now, I work in a prison, and I have for a long time, and I deal a lot with child offenders, pedophiles, grown adult males who have been convicted of having sexual relations with children. And it's disturbing, it's disgusting, it's upsetting, it's all of those things, nothing to joke about. And we have defined within our culture that behavior as being illegal, among other things such as immoral and unethical. Now, if you travel to New Guinea and we examine the Samba tribe, and you can Google this if you don't believe me, there's a rite of passage. A lot of places, a lot of tribes in underdeveloped parts of the world, even in our part of the world, which is developed, we have rites of passage. As you are a young person moving into adulthood, college is a rite of passage. I've heard that, casting your first vote is a rite of passage. Drinking alcohol when you're 21, don't do that, by the way, is also considered a rite of passage into adulthood. Well, in this part of the world, the older men of the tribe, as you see, will literally ingest the semen of the young boys in a symbolic ritual. The idea is that when the older men ingest the semen, and then you heard that correctly, by the way, I'm not going to give you any images of that. You can find those on your own if you're inclined to do so. But the idea is that it symbolizes something. The older men are not pedophiles. They're not sex offenders. They're not even homosexual necessarily. It's the idea of consuming the youth to keep them alive, to keep them strong. That semen, that the youth symbolizes strength and virility, and that's what the older men are taking in to their bodies. And also, it's a way of a young boy sort of sharing something with an older man to help him become a man. So when I say that, it's even weird to say it. I've said it a million times teaching classes, but it's still weird to me to even say that or to think about that. Now, in this part of the world, we would look at this and we would be like horribly disgusted. When I talk about this example in my sociology classes, students are mortified. They can't believe that something like this could happen. But again, if you didn't know any differently, if you were born in this part of the world, you wouldn't think of this rite of passage or this ritual as anything horrifically offensive. So it's something to think about. I'm not condoning that kind of behavior. Let me be clear about that. But it just shows differences, cultural differences. This is a really good example of that. Now, some of you, maybe you've had the opportunity to travel outside of your county or your state or even the country. A lot of times we experience what's called culture shock when we travel outside of our comfort area. I remember the first time I traveled, I was raised in Lincoln County, so I'm close to you guys. And I remember, if you know where Booger Hole is, that's in Alum Creek. That's where I was born. That's where I was raised. So maybe you know where that is. Ask your parents. Maybe they know. I remember the first time I went to Charleston. Yes, Charleston, when I was a kid. I thought, oh my gosh, there's a bridge, and there's like a big river, and there's like a mall, and there's like people and cars. It was a little disorienting. Now, I laugh when I think about that now. And then I remember the first time I left the state of West Virginia. I went to New York City with my high school when I went to Nitro High School. And I stepped off the school bus onto a sidewalk. If you've ever been to a major city, there were all kinds of cars, people from different parts of the world, different languages being spoken. I almost got ran over by a taxi cab driver the minute I stepped off our school bus. And then he cursed me in some language I couldn't understand. So that was my culture shock. That was my initial introduction to New York. I also had the opportunity to travel to Russia in the late 90s. My daughter is adopted from Russia, and we went over to get her. And there were a lot of things that I saw there that were sort of strange to me. Very, not upsetting, but just strange. Because I wasn't used to seeing things like 9 and 10-year-old children drinking straight vodka like we would drink an energy drink or a soda. Evidently there was no enforced legal drinking age there. In Europe, when we traveled overseas, it was very common to see grown men kissing each other as a greeting. Like if I saw a male friend of mine, I would shake his hand or maybe do the fist pump thing. Probably wouldn't kiss him on the lips. We would look at that within our culture as being something very specific. In parts of Europe, it's not seen as strange at all. So again, it just depends on where you're at and how you're raised and what culture you're a part of in terms of what you think is normal or not normal. I had a student some years ago who served our country, and he was in Amsterdam, and he was talking about legalized prostitution, and was talking about, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about gender later in the semester, how essentially men would window shop. Like, you guys, if you've ever been to the mall, have you ever done window shopping? Have you ever, maybe you've walked to 4 or 5 stores, you've looked in the stores, you're like, yeah, I like those boots, I might get those, or yeah, I like that sweater, that's a possibility, and I might get those shoes, and then you make a decision and you make a purchase. Same with prostitutes. Men would literally walk through the red light district of Amsterdam and would check out the girls in the windows. That's the most G-rated picture I could find to show high school students of this concept, and would basically, yeah, that one's blonde, maybe. Hey, this one's a brunette, perhaps. Hey, yeah, we'll go with you. And a purchase for a service happens, and you actually get a receipt as well for your service that you purchased. So I don't, and when he told me that story, I couldn't believe that. I couldn't get that through my head. But if you didn't know any differently, again, some other examples of culture shock. I would ask, if we were in a classroom, for you to think about or talk about a time where maybe you experienced culture shock. Maybe a time where you traveled to a different part of the world, or maybe even just a different part of the country or state. You would probably be able to tell some stories about, some strange things that you saw or some things that would happen. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call that the end of this part. Thank you.